Hello, my name is Stephen Westland. I work at the University of Leeds in the UK, where I'm Professor of Colour Science and Technology. And as you can see, I'm quite old. In fact, I'm in my 60s. But it's not all bad. It means I've been working in the area of colour for a long time. Since my early 20s, in fact, so the best part of 40 years. So I just thought it would be nice to record my thoughts on a few interesting aspects of colour, because it's a most fascinating topic that's kept me engaged for these 40 years. And over the years I've studied colour from different perspectives, from different disciplines, if you like. I started with a degree in chemistry, colour chemistry in fact, then a PhD, guess what, in colour physics. I worked in a neuroscience department for 10 years, in an engineering school for 4 or 5, and I've been in the School of Design at Leeds for over 20 years. So I think I do have something to say about a few topics. And in this short series of videos, I want to discuss this topic of colour, and I want to do this through a series of questions. So, for example, the first question I want to try to answer is, where is colour? And I'll do that in my next video. But before then, I want to lay some foundations, what I call Colour 101. So firstly, it's generally agreed now that there's a sequence of events that starts with light and ends in colour. So we start with light, and this light falls on or illuminates an object. The object reflects some of that light, and this can enter the eye of an observer. And here the light activates special light-sensitive cells in the inner lining of the eyeball. There are 3 types of these cones. One type that's mainly sensitive to short wavelength light, the S cones. One type that's mainly sensitive to medium wavelength light, the M cones. And one type that's mainly sensitive to longer wavelength light, the L cones. And once activated, these cones send electrochemical signals to elsewhere in the brain, and we experience vision generally. And in the context of these videos, we experience colour specifically. Oh, quick caveat. Some people have fewer than 3 types of cones, and some people have more than 3 types. But we'll deal with that issue in a much later video. Now, in putting forward this sequence of events, I am almost suggesting that colour is generated in the brain in response to light reflected from objects. And if you think that is the case, spoiler alert, in my opinion, you're not wrong. But as we'll see later, there is plenty of room for argument actually about whether colour is really sort of out there in the world, or whether it's literally in here, in our heads, and a property of brain activity. We didn't always understand this sequence: light, object, eye, brain, colour. Our ancestors believed, in fact, that we could see things because our eyes sent out a beam of light to the object. So Plato, for example, had a theory called Extramission, in which beams of light were emitted from the eye, and this enabled us to see things. Now you might think, surely the fact that we couldn't see in the dark would stop this theory dead in its tracks. Well, not really. See, Plato had already thought of that. He knew about light sources, and he knew that light sources were necessary for vision. But his theory of extramission, further developed by his student Aristotle, was that only when the light from our eyes fused with ambient illumination from a light source were we able to see the world. In other words, we needed an external light source and the light from our eyes. So was there any empirical evidence for the theory of extramission? Well, perhaps proponents of the theory would point to the light that can be seen to shine from a cat's eyes. We now know that this light is reflected light from the retina, which enables cats to see in low light conditions. And I have heard that the custom of a soldier saluting originated in them shielding their eyes from the bright light that they assumed to come from the eyes of their commanders, who they would have assumed to be people with great vision. I don't know whether this is actually true or not, because I've heard other stories to do with saluting being connected with raising the visor on your suit of armour. So if you know anything about this story of where saluting came from and whether it is to do with the theory of extramission, please do put it down in the comments and I'll read it. Anyway, eventually, probably starting with Kepler and his work in the 1600s with lenses, the theory of extramission was replaced by the theory of intermission, whereby light is reflected or emitted by objects, and this light enters the eye, where we now know that it activates the cells in the human retina. But there's actually a paper from 2002, believe it or not, that found evidence that about 50% of USA college students still believe in some form of extramission. It's so shocking, in fact, that I've put the reference to this article in the description below so you can check it out for yourself. I do think most educated people today would accept intermission and the sequence of events that I've outlined, that is light, object, eye, brain, colour. It's a sort of causal sequence. Now, optics and colour vision are much more complicated than this simple sequence. I'm certainly not saying that this simple sequence of events is sufficient to explain everything we can observe and experience about colour vision. But it's a starting point, and it is the starting point I'd like to use for the videos that will shortly follow this one. The final thing I want to discuss in this opening video, Colour 101, is something about the experience of colour, of seeing colour. It's generally considered that there are three terms that can be used to describe a colour experience. The first is hue, and this is the extent to which a colour seems to be red, green, yellow, blue, etc. So the colours that you can see on the screen now all vary in hue. The second attribute is lightness. Now, this is whether a colour appears light or dark. In the colours that you can now see on screen, you can see colours that all have the same hue, but vary from low lightness on the left to high lightness on the right. And the third attribute is saturation. So in the colours you can now see on screen, you can see colours that all have approximately the same hue and lightness, but vary from low saturation on the left to high saturation on the right. We might say that the colours become more colourful as we move from left to right. But again, there's a simplification here. Terms such as saturation, chroma, and colourfulness are all subtly different. And later we may also explore the difference between lightness and brightness, for example. But for now, these distinctions are not important. It's just important to know that colour has these different attributes. So I'm part of a project called the Colour Literacy Project, and this project is concerned with how colour is taught, and it tries to reconcile theories about colour with practice. And I've put a link to the Colour Literacy Project in the description below, so please check out that page and their page about the common misconceptions people have about colour, if you want to read more about that. You may notice I've not spoken at all about light and wavelength in this opening salvo. That's a deliberate choice, but wavelength will be getting full attention in the coming videos. So look out for my next video, in which I'm going to tackle a very meaty topic, which is whether colour is a property of the world or whether it's something that we generate in our brains.